Shabbat Shalom. Over the past 6 months, I have sometimes found myself thinking about Anne Frank. 2 years ago, our family took a vacation to Amsterdam. We saw many marvelous sights, beautiful artwork and architecture, relaxing boat rides along the canals, the famous windmills, the old Jewish quarter. We ate stroopwafels, Dutch fries with cheese sauce, Dutch pancakes, both savory and sweet, Dutch chocolate, and a variety of Dutch cheeses. And we also visited the Anne Frank house. We took the tour in which we saw the tiny space that this young teenager occupied with her immediate family and a couple of other people. 7 people altogether hid from the Nazis for 25 months in this tiny space. Walking through the narrow passageways and up the even narrower staircases, it was hard to imagine how these 7 people survived for so long in hiding. Never able to come out for fresh air, hardly able to move lest they be heard by someone and then discovered. Even then, I realized how awful it must have been to have to live in such tight quarters for such a long time. But now, many of us have had a somewhat similar experience, of course, to a much, much lesser degree. We're fortunate to be able to live in our comparatively spacious, air-conditioned, fully furnished homes with Wi-Fi, computers, cell phones, and cable television. We can occasionally go out to take a walk and even go to the store if we are careful. We can see our friends in small groups if we're careful. And so far, it has only been 6 months, not 25 months. But we can also feel isolated, lonely, disoriented, and even at times despondent. Even with our comparatively luxurious semi-confinement. And so when I think of Anne Frank, I'm inspired by the tenacity and the perseverance that she and her companions were able to achieve. Thinking about Anne Frank puts our experience in perspective. They survived for 25 months in self-imposed captivity until someone exposed their secret. And of course, Anne's life came to a tragic end at Bergen-Belsen only months before the end of the war. But hundreds of millions of people all over the world know her story. They know her story because she wrote her story in her diary, and her diary survived. And her father, who also survived, published her diary. But Anne Frank's story is inspiring not simply because she survived for 25 months in hiding. It is inspiring because so many of the things that she wrote in her diary. For instance, I want to share with you this short passage that she wrote. I finally realized that I must do my schoolwork to keep from being ignorant, to get on in life, to become a journalist, because that's what I want. I know I can write, but it remains to be seen whether I really have talent. And if I don't have the talent to write books or newspaper articles, I can always write for myself. But I want to achieve more than that. I can't imagine living like Mother or Mrs. Van Daan and all the women who go about their work and are then forgotten. I need to have something besides a husband and children to devote myself to. I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living even after my death. And that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift, which I can use to develop myself and to express all that's inside of me. When I write, I can shake off all my cares. My sorrow disappears. My spirits are revived. But, and that's the big question, will I ever be able to write something great? Will I ever become a journalist or a writer? What's inspiring about Anne Frank is that she's painfully aware of her impossible situation, and yet she discovers her mission in life, to be a writer. and she pursues that mission with a passion, even while trapped in a tiny building with several other people all day long for months. She manages to set aside her immediate concerns and focus on her life goal. She's inspiring because at the same time, she expresses how grateful she is to God that she has discovered her passion. She's grateful that she has this gift of writing. Even in this horrible situation she's found herself in, she's also found something to be grateful for. And she's inspiring because she hopes to use her talent to inspire others. It's truly sad that she did not live to find out just how famous her diary became. She never learned how many people would admire her talent for writing. Now, I've been thinking about Anne Frank and her diary for months, but I decided to share these thoughts this week because of a very well-known passage that Rabbi Strauss mentioned in his remarks earlier, a passage that's very famous in the Torah that I hope you'll recognize. And just as Rabbi Strauss learned something from the passage for our situation today, I also learned something from this passage today. But first, I want to read to you the entire passage. My father was a wandering Aramean. He went down to eat only a small clan to settle for a short time. There he became a great big nation. But the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They burdened us with crushing labor. We cried out to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, an awesome power, and by signs and wonders. And he brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Therefore, I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, O Lord, have given me. Now, you may have recognized these words as they're buried in the Passover Haggadah. If you didn't recognize them, don't worry. Some modern Haggadahs leave these words out, although they were originally supposed to be the centerpiece of the Passover ritual. Your Haggadahs at home may also use a different translation, so you may not have recognized those exact words, or it might have been one of those passages skipped over at your Seder. But in any case, these words are found in the beginning of the Torah portion we read this morning, and they're a short summary of the history of our people from the time of the patriarchs to the enslavement in Egypt, and finally to successful landowners and farmers in our homeland, Israel. But as I read these words this year, they also gave me comfort and hope. Like so many other people, we have been socially isolating ourselves because of the COVID-19 virus. But we also know there are many other people suffering much worse, losing their jobs. Some are about to be evicted from their homes, those who have been stricken by the virus, others who have lost relatives or friends to it. And so as I read this passage in the Torah that we read this morning, I found comfort in this short summary of our people. These words that form the core of our Passover Seder remind us that we were once wandering, homeless people, and then we were slaves in Egypt. But God brought us out of the darkness and misery of bondage with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, with marvels and miracles. And more than that, God led us to a land flowing with milk and honey where we could live and prosper as free people again. No longer homeless, no longer helpless, no longer strangers in a strange land. My colleague and teacher, Rabbi David Golinkin, suggested 3 lessons we can learn from this short passage in the Torah. 3 lessons that I believe provide a Jewish response to our modern-day plague. The first lesson is our personal identification with the history of our people. My father was a wandering Aramean, the Torah would have each of us say. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us, oppressed us. We cried to God, and the Lord heard our plea and our misery and freed us from Egypt. We are to identify with the misery of our ancestors and with their redemption. We are to imagine that we experienced this suffering and salvation ourselves. We are thus prepared for the hardships that we might face in our own lives today. We have been through much worse in the past. We recovered from those situations, and we can and we will recover today. The second lesson is the proverbial attitude of gratitude. The Israelite farmer was supposed to recite these words after harvesting his crops in the spring, and a successful farmer might be tempted to think he earned this success and fortune on his own by the sweat of his own brow. And indeed, it usually is the case that if we do hard work, it does bring rewards. But the Torah reminds us that it's not our hard work alone that has enabled us to put food on the table and a roof over our heads. We have been blessed by God with good weather, usually, with fertile land or other business opportunities, with God-given brains and insights that help us to make the most of our physical and personality strengths and natural resources. But it is especially at times like this, when our world is so out of balance, that we ought to look for and appreciate the blessings we so often take for granted. Diane and I are grateful that we're employed, that we can do much of our work at our homes, and we're grateful that our son is with us going to school, virtually online, of course. We're grateful for our friends and our community, all of you, and we're grateful that we are still healthy so far. But there are, of course, many people who have been truly devastated and can find little to be grateful for right now. And our prayers are with them that they too will come to find comfort, safety, and security in the days and months ahead. And that is where the third lesson we learn from this passage in the Torah comes in. The third lesson, according to Rabbi Lincoln, is that we should extend our concern and our compassion toward those who are disadvantaged or who are suffering in our society. Right after the farmer makes his declaration about how his father was a wandering Aramean, and now he is in a land flowing with milk and honey and is therefore bringing a portion of his crops to the priest to thank God for all the blessings that he has received, right after he makes this declaration, the Torah tells us, "You shall enjoy together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household." Our memory and identification with our ancestors who were homeless wanderers and slaves, and our attitude of gratitude for the gifts that God has graciously given us are supposed to inspire us with a sense of compassion for those who are now suffering as our ancestors once suffered, so that we will share the bounty that the Lord has given us with those who are burdened by their losses. Anne Frank, too, found something to be grateful for. She was grateful to God for her gift of writing, and she hoped she would be able to share her gift to give hope to others, and so she did. As we reflect on our ancestors' story and the story of Anne Frank, may we too be inspired to find something to be grateful for in our lives, and may we also share our gifts with those in need. Shabbat Shalom.